All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to PHIL-1006, The Great Philosophers at Fanshawe. We are live Tuesdays and Thursdays around 1 o'clock, given how my domestic situation is going on any given day. We're all working from home. Right now, I got a couple kids running around. I got 3 Rogers trucks outside warning me the internet connection might go down, so we'll just see how it goes. So before we get started, just a few reminders. This is an accelerated class. We aim to be done before the June break, basically. So here is the quizzes page in FOL. As you can see here, we have online quiz number 2, covering Aristotle to Spinoza. That's modules 3 to 6. As always, these quizzes are open book, open notes. You can even go to Google. The questions are largely based on the slides rather than the textbook, although I really think the textbook is great. The next thing after that, just a few days later, the midterm opens. So that's something also to keep on your radar, but it's available the day after your essays are due. All right, so the midterm will open the 25th. Your essays are due the 24th. Now, again, I realize this is really quick. It seems like there's always something to do, but you get a full credit in just 6 weeks, 7 weeks, so maybe the trade-off is worth it. So let's get started on what we're doing today. Let me just look. I'm going to keep an eye, of course, on the chat box as well. So if you're watching live, you can just pop into that chat box and I'll try and answer your questions in a timely manner. I am a little bit behind on student emails. Those of you who sent me emails asking questions about essay format and things like that, sit tight. I'll get to it right after this live stream. Okay, so let's get started. Module 5 already. I feel like we've just begun the class and we're already talking about René Descartes, or as we say in English, Descartes. I'm from Quebec, right? So the first time, my dad used to make fun of me for like pronouncing Descartes the English way. We're talking about Descartes and the Renaissance. So who is Descartes? He's the guy who you might have heard came up with I think, therefore I am. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means, put it in some context, why it was a big deal. He's a guy born 1596, died 1650, right? Was not just a philosopher, he was a mathematician, a scientist, and he's kind of a pivotal figure because we think of Cartesianism as a system, Descartes as a thinker, a philosopher, that really represents a really decisive break with the medieval tradition of theology of philosophy. So, of course, if you zoom in and you're like a scholar of medieval thought, you'll see a lot of continuity. But for the purposes of an introductory class, we should think of this period here, right? The 1500s, 1600s, as really where we're starting to see important changes in mindset, in approach from the medieval period. So what we have is, if we're going to think about periodization, which is the tendency to like look back and think of discrete historical periods. Again, I think if you're a serious historian, you're going to look upon periodization with some suspicion because you have this kind of fine-grained sense of history. But these are useful fictions, at least in a pedagogical context, to just kind of help us get a handle on a tremendous amount of information. So very roughly, if we're talking medieval period, we're talking 500 AD, collapse of the Roman Empire, to roughly 1400, which is the beginning of the Renaissance. 1400, 1650 Renaissance era, 1650 to 1800 AD, roughly, we're talking about the Enlightenment era. So Descartes, active at the end of the Renaissance, and died just as the Enlightenment was starting to happen. So what are these things? So the Renaissance is kind of a post-medieval period where from the 14th, my internet's still up, this is great. So it was started as kind of a cultural movement, largely centered in Italy. am I back on? Oh no, I don't know where I was. They warned me this would happen. Alright, I think I'm back online. So, I have no idea when the stream broke off. So, let me just pick it up from, we're talking about the Renaissance. So one of the things we were doing was challenging the authority of figures like Aristotle, which had really dominated thought until that period. So you can kind of click through the link here, right? We now know that objects of different weights will fall at the same rate of speed. We have to do the experiment. The Apollo 15 astronauts even did it on the moon. So it's really, the idea here is I just want to emphasize that what was happening is that there's a period, that there's kind of a challenge to establish authority, successfully overturn texts that for 1,000 years had been kind of unchallenged. All right, I'm sorry about my internet connection, you guys. I hope things are making sense to you. I'll keep an eye on that chat box, so if things don't work out, let me know. So we have this tradition of Renaissance science, which kind of culminated, of course, later on with Isaac Newton. There was some observation, there was experiment, and there was mathematical analysis. So Galileo famously wrote that the book of nature is written in the language of mathematics. Right? So you begin with observation, hypothesis formation, mathematical modeling, testing, then you refine the model, right, so on and so forth. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but so when I do this in class, I ended up having this long digression on Newtonian physics. But let's not talk about Newtonian physics, right? But let's talk instead about how this new science didn't just challenge the authority of ancient texts. It challenged really basic ideas about who we were as a species and what our place in the universe was. Because it became really increasingly clear that the planet Earth and humanity did not occupy a special place in creation. This became really obvious, maybe not just the Renaissance era, but over the span of 300 years, we realized a number of things. For example, that the geocentric model of the universe couldn't possibly be correct, which is the model of the universe where the Earth is at the center of all the universe and everything revolves around the Earth. The sun revolves around the Earth. Right? We know that the Earth revolves around the sun, and the sun is just one star in a galaxy, and the galaxy is just one galaxy amongst millions of galaxies in a very old, very immense universe. But coming to this realization took a long time. However, the move from realizing that the Earth did not occupy a special place in creation to more radical views took a long time. So Newton probably was a man of religious faith, right? He believed his equations was kind of evidence of a perfect creator. Later on, about around 1850 or so, the physicist Laplace was asked by Napoleon why he had not mentioned the creator in his work on physics, and he said, look, I have no need for that hypothesis. So all that to say, right, the Renaissance leading to the Enlightenment was a time of challenging orthodoxy and the rise of a science that really remade our relationship, our perceived relationship with ourselves and with the universe we inhabit. So a very, very radical time. Another historical factor we should talk about, of course, is the status of religion in Europe. So, end of the medieval period, switching to the Renaissance, to the Enlightenment, of course, we have something called the Protestant Reformation, right, which is kind of a religious schism within Christianity. The Protestant Church breaks from the Catholic Church, right, with Martin Luther in the church in Wittenberg, right, famously nailing his 95 theses, saying that that the Catholic Church has problems and he wants to have his own church. So this set off a number of religious wars, culminating in the 30 Years' War, the Peace of Westphalia, which was kind of the basis for the modern nation-state system. And the unprecedented nature and carnage and destruction of these wars, not to mention subsequent bouts of the plague, really bred greater skepticism about the theological approach to reality. So what's happening here is that we have a number of competing intellectual currents that, not competing, but kind of the opposite, more like synergistically coming together and pushing theology out of the way a little bit and having an increased emphasis on right, kind of a more secular understanding of ourselves and our place in the universe. Right, part of it is rediscovery of ancient texts, part of it is new science, part of it is this backdrop of 100 years of religious warfare following the Protestant Reformation, right, weakening kind of the relationship between governments and church in society. Okay. I am talking too much today. I've been online for 20 minutes already. However, I'm still online. So from this Renaissance era of new science, we have kind of an Enlightenment era where we have an increasing amount of political changes now occurring. So the Wikipedia article has a really nice summary, right? Le siècle des Lumières in French, Aufklärung in Germany. So the principal goals of Enlightenment era thinkers was to start really being applying Renaissance ideas to reforming society as a whole. So they were strong believers in personal liberty, in the possibility of progress, in the potential power of reason, in the importance of toleration. They were pretty anti-clerical in the sense that they wanted to end the abuses of church, especially when it was working together with state power. Right? They were opposed to absolute monarchy. So what we have here is an increasing scientific rigor, more empiricism, questioning of religious orthodoxy. So we take the Renaissance and we start applying it to politics, applying it to reforming society. Immanuel Kant, we're going to get to him in a couple modules, said, look, what is enlightenment? Enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-imposed immaturity, the inability to use your own understanding without guidance from another. That's what immaturity is, and enlightenment is society becoming mature, i.e. you don't need guidance. Right? This kind of paternalistic view that everybody needs to be shepherded through their entire adult life by the state, by the church, by whoever. The immaturity is self-imposed when its cause lies not in lack of understanding, but in lack of resolve and courage to use it. Right? But dare to know, have the courage to use your own understanding is the motto of enlightenment. You can read more about it here. So that's kind of the context of what's happening. Really radical changes are happening in society, slowly trickling out over a couple hundred years. Right? But science is changing our view of the world, the rediscovery of ancient texts is changing our view of history and of ourselves. Right? Religious orthodoxy is being questioned, or the political scene is changing radically. So it's a period of tremendous change, is what I'm trying to say here. So Descartes is really kind of a nice example of how these changes are occurring. Right, because, I mean, Descartes' philosophical significance is at least in part that he's trying to reconstruct philosophy in a way from scratch, which is very much in keeping with the spirit of the times. He doesn't want to rely on Aristotle. He does not want to have to spend half his book quoting the officially approved theological manuscripts that he had to study in school. Right? He doesn't want to just update existing thought. He wants to start new. To start new, of course, is in a way impossible. So he has influences. He's influenced by the physics of his day. In fact, he contributed in no small way to the physics and science of his day. He's definitely influenced by the humanism of the Renaissance, right? When you were reading Lucretius or reading the ancient Roman thinkers, the political thinkers like Seneca and Cicero, who had a lot to say on what the good life was. But they're definitely not Christian thinkers either. So there's a whole body of human experience opening up. There was, in many countries, there was a lot of free thinking, where you couldn't be persecuted for having like heretical opinions, right? So he wants to start over, but there are influences. You can't escape influences. And Descartes' interesting too, because as he's starting over, he's going to push for rationalism over empiricism. Rationalism is, of course, reason is more foundational than observation, but he does it to defend science, to defend observation, which is pretty interesting. But there are limits to Descartes' attempts at novelty. He was probably a sincere religious believer, as everyone was in those times, more or less. He wanted to make room for science within the church, common goal, again, before we get to the more radical late Enlightenment thinkers. He did accept some scholastic arguments, which, again, he says he wants to start new, but does he? So, for example, he will use that ontological argument in a pretty crucial way, as we'll see. So there are limits to the novelty here, but that's normal. So in first philosophy, what is Descartes doing? So first philosophy means to start over, to have like a foundational argument. So what he's going to do is begin by trying to answer at what can we know? What can we know for sure? What is absolutely certain? And what Descartes began with is something called methodological skepticism. To answer the question, what do we know for sure? One way we can approach it is by asking ourselves, what is it that we can doubt? And everything that it is possible to doubt, we should just discard. And if we do that systematically, we may be left with some beliefs that we are absolutely sure of, things that can't be doubted. We're not meant to take this literally, in the sense that, like, I could probably doubt all kinds of things, but if I actually did them in my life, I wouldn't be able to live. I'd be bumping into walls. Do I really have a job? What even is money? So it's a methodology in the sense that it's a technique we're using for philosophical ends, right? We're going to be skeptical about our beliefs to see if anything can resist thoroughgoing skepticism. So what can be doubted? Descartes says, look, pretty much everything can be doubted. And by pretty much everything, he means pretty much everything, right? Everything I've been told, every theory, everything I've ever seen, heard, or smelled could be doubted. Mathematics could be doubted, honestly. Logic, who knows if logic's actually true. And so Descartes, in the beginning of his book, his kind of first meditation, just starts really systematically offering a case to doubt, just to be skeptical of, right? Is there a reason I can doubt every theory of physics I have, every religious belief I have? Yes, there is, which is, again, a pretty radical thing to do. Ultimately, he comes to the conclusion that even all his sense experiences could be systematically doubted as well. How do I know I have hands? He says, well, we could be dreaming. We could be deceived by an illusion. In more modern terms, right, we could imagine ourselves as living in some kind of computer simulation. So I believe I'm in a room in my basement teaching a class, but this could be wrong. I could be like Neo in the Matrix, where what I really am is a guy in a pod, and I'm experiencing this illusion of a reality where, like, look, here's my water bottle. How do I know I have a water bottle here? Well, I don't know for sure. The water bottle could be an illusion. So Descartes says, right, empiricism and observation can't be a secure foundation for knowledge because it's logically possible to doubt the knowledge of my senses. Now, it's not necessarily a likely thing that I'm a brain in a vat or that I'm being deceived, but I can't eliminate the doubt entirely. So it's not doubt proof. It's not 100% absolutely certain. Is there anything that is absolutely certain? Descartes says there's actually at least one thing, right? That there's a person thinking these thoughts of doubting, right? In order for there to be doubting, there must be a doubter. There must be somebody thinking about knowledge. So there must be something that exists, even if it exists in an illusion. Right? So, I mean, if you've seen The Matrix, right? Neo discovers that his senses have been deceiving him all his life. Everything he thought he knew about reality was false. But there's one thing Neo always knew, even when he was in the Matrix, is that he existed, which is the meaning of the Latin cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, which is the one thing that cannot be doubted amongst everything else that can be doubted, is the fact that you exist in some way. You might not even exist in a body, but your consciousness certainly exists. Your thoughts certainly exist. Right? It was an attack on empiricism in a way. Right? It was, I think therefore I am, is rationalistic in the sense that it's a thesis that relies on reason alone. I don't need to have any particular sense experience in order to realize I'm a thinking substance that obviously has a consciousness and that therefore exists in some way. I exist as a mind, if nothing else. Now you might think I need to experience my thoughts in order to know I'm thinking, so that's a kind of empiricism. Descartes would say no, because that is not sense experience in the sense of experiencing an external world. What you have is your own mind having thoughts, is not an experience. So the next move he makes is unfortunately a little bit unsatisfying to me. So we get the cogito ergo sum, right? I know my mind must exist if nothing else because I'm the one thinking these thoughts of doubt. But if I'm able to think, I'm able to entertain ideas and thoughts. And if I'm able to think, I can think thoughts such as, what is the most perfect being? And if I can think about the most perfect being must exist, because if it lacks a perfection, the perfection of existence, and it's not as good as the one that does have the attribute of perfect existence, and boom, we have the existence of God. We're back to the ontological argument. Descartes, why'd you do that? So, in the second meditation, I think, or is it the third? Where does he do that? Anyway, he doubts everything, but he establishes that he exists because his thoughts exist. But if thoughts exist, then you could think of the perfect being. And if you could think of the perfect being definitely exists. And a perfect being wouldn't deceive you, because he's perfect, and deception is bad. So our perceptions correspond to reality. Therefore, rationalism secures observation through God's existence, because a just, perfect God would not deceive us. The cogito by itself does not show that our ideas of the world correspond to the actual world, that this bottle is real. Right? You need the step of the ontological argument to prove there's a perfect God, and therefore to show that the perfect God wouldn't deceive you about things. If you don't accept the ontological argument, you're back to just being a thinking substance, but that's all you can know. So again, Descartes is being very clever here, right? He's going to use rationalism to prove God, and he's going to use his proof of God to defend scientific observation, right? It's very clever. So, one other thesis that he gives in order to defend science and to create a view that there's science over here, there's God over there, and they're compatible with each other, is a view called dualism. And it's the dualism means like as in duality, as in dual, as in two. It's a view that there's going to be two kinds of things. And these two kinds of things is mind and body. So Descartes is then going to argue for mind-body dualism. Mind-body dualism kind of basically means there are two fundamental ontological substances. It's a metaphysical view. If you go back to the earlier classes, the pre-Socratics, for example, had all kinds of ontological theories. Everything is fire, everything is water, everything is made out of atoms. So these are what we call monist views, mono from one. However, Descartes can have a dualist view. Right? There's two fundamental kinds of things that exist. One of them is matter, the other one is consciousness, or mind and body. And they're separate. And there are a number of arguments he gives proving for him to his satisfaction that they must be separate. So the Cogito aims to show that we can doubt everything, almost everything. One thing we can't doubt is that our consciousness exists. And Descartes is going to say this shows that our mind, our consciousness, is distinct from body. How is it distinct, ontologically speaking? Well, I can be skeptical about whether or not I have a material body, right? But I can't be skeptical about my consciousness. All right? I can doubt that I have a material body, but I can't doubt that I have thoughts. This shows for Descartes, mind has to be different from matter, right? Because identical things have identical properties. If mind and body were the same thing, they should have all the same properties because they're identical, right? If my phone is identical to itself, so right, if I say it'll have all the same properties as itself. I could think of it using two different words. This is my phone, and it is also my smartphone. So if my phone and my smartphone are the same things, they both have all the same properties. Maybe this analogy is not working. So mind and body have to be distinct for Descartes, because you can doubt one but not doubt the other. But if identical things have identical properties because they're the same thing, you shouldn't be able to doubt one and not the other. So mind and body have to be different. Right? And there's a whole number of other arguments Descartes will give for mind-body dualism. Right? So the mind can't be material. Also because thoughts have no extension. What that means is they don't occupy space. Whereas all material bodies are defined, in fact, by their extension, by the fact that they occupy physical space. So the mind lacks another property, which is extension in physical space. A thought is immaterial, isn't it? It doesn't take up room. It doesn't take up space. So the mind has to be different from body. Right? So our minds, and like the jelly inside our skulls we call brains, the only organ that named itself, can't be identical to the mind. Right? Because the brain is a physical substance, but a thought, the thing we can't doubt, is not a physical substance. So mind and body are separate. There are a number of other arguments in this period as well. So I think Locke later on argued that matter can't think, and there's no configuration of matter that could think, but our brains think. Therefore, mind and matter are different. Matter doesn't have a subjective experience, but minds do have subjective experiences. Therefore, mind and matter are different. Right. So again, let me grab my phone here. If I take a picture of something red, my phone is not experiencing redness. What it has is like a little camera aperture here that absorbs electromagnetic radiation, i.e. light, and then it translates that light into information, the ones and zeros. But my phone doesn't have experiences when it takes a picture. I have experiences. So the argument goes, there's no configuration of matter that can give rise to experience. So again, whatever it is that is having these experiences can't be matter. And that's the dualist view, right? Matter and mind are different. Right? So the Epicureans, right, who were influenced by the atomists like Democritus, right? We're all just atoms in a void. That's substance monism. There's only matter. Right? Whatever my mind is to the monist, it just is a configuration of matter. It's atoms, it's brains in a specific combination of an assortment configuration, giving rise to thoughts. But for Descartes, that has to be wrong. Matter and mind are ontologically different substances. There's two kinds of things in the world. There's mind and there's body. There's spirit, there's matter. That's the dualist view. Descartes, for example, thought animals were just material, they were just kind of machines, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but, all right. He also believed our mind directs our body, and that explains free will. So you saying that there's mind and body kind of helps you have a scientific picture of the world, which could be mechanistic, which could be deterministic. So it's okay to have physical laws that make predictions because it doesn't threaten free will. Because fundamentally, science is the science of the material world, and theology is about spirit. It's about mind. So science can go ahead and make us discoveries about the material world, and it will never threaten views on the soul because it's about different things, because there's two fundamentally different kinds of substance in the world. So, dualism seems like a good solution to a number of philosophical problems, right? It helps you have a science with a specific kind of like I want to use the word magisterium, but that's too complicated for no reason. A specific topic. It's about matter. It enables you to keep free will, right? It tells scientists you don't have to try and figure out how inert matter can give rise to subjective experience, right? It seems like a really good solution to a number of problems, especially at the time. And frankly, the mind is still kind of mysterious, even in the year 2020. So, the distinct properties of mind and matter, nice solution. How am I doing for time here? How long have I been talking? 40 minutes. All right. So, right, dualism again argues there's two basic kinds of stuff in the universe: material and mental. However, substances are meant to be metaphysically basic, in the sense that there's two fundamentally different kinds of ontological things. They can't inhabit the same realm or can't interact because they would be unified in one substance as well. Let me just go through that again, right? Substances are basic, and if they could interact with each other, they'd be part of one larger ontological realm. So we could unify them under substance monism again, right? They'd be explained by some third thing. So if you're going to have substance dualism, if you're going to have two different kinds of metaphysical stuff, then they have to be separate. They have to be kept separate because otherwise, if they were joined together, there'd be one kind of thing, and their joining would be the one kind of thing. This raises a problem for Descartes, for whom one of the main motivations of I'm still online, aren't I? Oh, good. One of the main motivations of dualism was, for example, to keep free will. Right? He was really invested in the idea that it is mind that directs the body, thus preserving free will, so you can have a scientific picture of the world that is explanatory, that makes predictions, that is deterministic or mechanistic, and you can also have a theological picture of the world where human souls are free. But this immediately raises the question: if they're separate substances, how does mind direct the body? How do they interact then? Because the whole point is that they don't, because they're different substances. And if they're interacting, isn't the space in which they're interacting the real monistic substance? Right? So I raise my hand, I wave it around, right? How did the non-material mind affect the atoms, the physical atoms of my hand? So, dualism, how does it work? To quote the Insane Clown Posse. I mean, they were worried about magnets, but close enough. So Descartes wants to say physical material bodies are subject to the mechanical physical laws of the material universe. Our thoughts don't take place in the material world. Our thoughts are a different kind of substance. The mind operates independently of the body. It's its own thing. So how do we get free will out of that? So many critics were worried about this problem, about how dualism could explain free will, how mind can affect matter, how my thought of I should raise my hand causes my hand to be raised. I think the sharpest critic here was probably Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia. She had extensive correspondence with Descartes, so they kind of wrote back and forth. Some people have said that the Renaissance of correspondence. And Descartes basically admitted to her, and they published this later, that he actually didn't really have a good solution. He said maybe, it's just it's a basic property of the soul that it can affect matter. That didn't make a lot of sense to the princess here. And just as a side note, I mean, the correspondence is really great because it's a really nice back and forth about that is readable and engaging, and also this kind of early modern periods. You have this kind of really important rise in women philosophers, which had been absent since the Greco-Roman period, right? This is not really fair to an amount of women working in abbeys as nuns who wrote important theological work. But yeah, this really kind of important rise in women philosophers in Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, whose correspondence with Descartes was published, I think, in the last 50 years or so, really kind of underscores this. So here's what she says. In a letter to Descartes in 1643, she says, "Given that the soul of a human being is only a thinking substance, how can it affect the bodily spirits in order to bring about voluntary actions? The question arises because it seems that how a thing moves depends solely on how much it is pushed, the manner in which it is pushed, the surface texture and shape of the thing that pushes it." The reason, there's as a parenthesis, she says pushing, is because in Descartes, this is before Isaac Newton, the mechanistic physics was a contact physics, in the sense that it was things touching and bumping into each other, like billiard balls, that explained all physical interactions. So when Isaac Newton comes up with the theory of gravity, which is an invisible force that acts at a distance, people were like, no, that can't be right. What about mechanistic physics, which is just about things coming into contact with each other? Okay, parenthesis closed, so that's why she's using the word pushing. The first two of these require contact between the two things. And the third requires that the causally active thing be extended, have extension, occupy space. Your notion of the soul entirely excludes extension, and it appears to me that an immaterial thing can't touch anything else, because touch is a property of material objects. So I ask for you a definition of the soul that homes in on its nature more thoroughly than does the one you give in your meditations. I want one that characterizes what it is as distinct as what it does, namely to think. Boom, princess. Oh my gosh. Descartes in shambles. He never gave a good answer to that as far as I'm concerned. But if we don't have dualism, then what? We're back to monism. That mind and matter are the same. But how can mind and matter be the same thing? How could a configuration of atoms give rise to feelings, emotions, subjectivity, thought? I don't know. Then we're back to dualism. Well, how does dualism affect the material world? I don't know. Then we're back to monism. So this is a big puzzle. If you ask me, a puzzle we're still stuck with today. Now, given the scope of this problem, which everyone was dealing with, and we're still stuck with, a number of solutions were proposed. Lots of very clever people were thinking about this. Some of Descartes' followers adopted something called occasionalism, which means on every occasion that a thought is had, God kind of comes in and makes a small miracle and mediates the causal relation between mind and body, right? So we could say, no, it's fine. Mind can't affect body, body can't affect mind. They are distinct substances, but God can intervene, gives the mind the appropriate sensations, and makes the body move by putting in the correct, right, doing the correct causal thing. So every act of free will by the mind affecting the material world is roughly a tiny little miracle that God just goes and does it. All right. That's one solution, occasionalism. I think that's Malebranche. Other solutions included Spinoza, who we talked about, who was did we talk about Spinoza? I think Spinoza's next week, next module, who was a monist who said there's actually only one substance, and it's God, and God is everything. Leibniz had pre-established harmony, which said like God is here's how cool and awesome God is. He set up a material universe where everything was determined in advance, right? So this is just this mechanical thing that's happening was predicted at the Big Bang. He didn't know the Big Bang existed. And he knew that I would want to move my hand, so God set up the universe in which a hand moves exactly when I would have wanted it to move. What about free will? Really good question. I don't know about free will. But these are some of the kinds of solutions people gave to Descartes' problems. Okay, whew, I talked a lot right now. So go look at your essays, right? They're due the 24th. I hope this kind of long lecture on the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, methodological skepticism, and dualism was at least kind of interesting and told you a little bit about Descartes. So, I will be online again Thursday. Thanks for listening, and send me an email. I hope to be able to answer them pretty soon. All right.